This podcast is powered by Feinberg Consulting and intervention, case management, coaching, and companion service. Hi, I'm Pam Feinberg-Rivkin, founder of Feinberg Consulting and Resilient Butterfly podcast. We are here with Dr. Robert Weiss, PhD, LCSW, and Dr. Weiss is the Chief Clinical Officer of Seeking Integrity, as well as who provides online education, support, and residential treatment for male sexual addicts and their families. And Dr. Weiss has written several books, to include a book called Prodependence. And that's where we're going to focus on today with Dr. Weiss. I heard Dr. Weiss at the Global Exchange, of which is a mental health conference, a year and a half ago, and was very inspired by this term, prodependence, and exactly what this is comparatively to codependence. So the book, Prodependence Beyond the Myth of Codependency. Dr. Weiss, thank you so much for coming on. I know that this has been a tremendous time for you and everyone else in Los Angeles, and I just want to say thank you that you're taking the time to do this. And I want to start out with what inspired you to write Prodependence, and how did you come up with the name?
Well, I'm pretty good with names. I wrote a book for gay men called Cruise Control. I wrote a book for men who are in trouble with women called Out of the Doghouse. But I was thinking about a friend who was struggling with some stuff. And I thought, they're not codependent, they're prodependent. And what I mean by that, do you want me to tell you what I mean by that?
Yes, I do.
I talk a lot.
I want to know what you mean by that, please.
So I've run treatment centers. I've created them, probably 8 or 9 in my world. And since the 80s, I heard this word codependence, tossed around. And it seemed to refer to people who were caregivers for addicts, and what it took for them to give up their lives to dedicate to the addict. And basically, it looked at codependence as being a pathology, like there's something wrong with these people for giving themselves up and for nagging and complaining and, doing all the stuff they do. And I watched in treatment centers where someone would finally, like a husband, would finally get to alcohol and drug treatment. And the family, they were thrilled, and the family members would go in a room, to talk about family work. And you would think they would say things like, wow, that must have been really hard for you, or this was a really grace-based experience. But instead, they would go in the room and say, let's talk about what's wrong with you. Mm-hmm. And I thought, how could that be when I have worked 3 jobs, dedicated myself to my family, done everything I could to get around this alcoholic, and what I did meant there's something wrong with me? Mm-hmm. Because I think, my favorite term, I think we stay with people, as troubled as they may be, because we love them.
Yeah. Simple
as that. And we want to support them. We want to be for them. And we are willing to give up parts of ourselves to make sure that they are safe and healthy. So this idea that somehow there's something wrong with me for wanting to put my life aside to care for someone I love, it really bothered me that could be considered a pathology.
Well, when you consider the fact that your addiction is considered, and everyone is talking about it as a disease, we have other diseases, muscular dystrophy, multiple sclerosis, those are diabetes, all of these things that people give up a lot of things in order to take care of their loved one, but they're not considered codependent, right?
Well, it's interesting you say that, because one of the things that I use to sort of justify or back up this conversation of prodependence is I compared. I said, what if someone has someone who's chronically ill and they're giving up their time and reading every book and racing around and gaining 30 pounds and nagging and complaining? People would say, oh, poor dear, or poor, your husband or wife has cancer. Mm-hmm. And people would bring them meatloaf, and help go to the house. But for some reason, if someone says, my partner is an addict, they don't support you. They don't come around and cheer for you. They look at you like there's something wrong with you. Mm-hmm. But the issue is the same. I love the person, they're ill, and I want to show up for them. It's as simple as that.
So with that, how can therapists in treatment centers approach this differently for families coming in and trying to figure out what they can be and do to heal themselves, because it's devastating what has happened, and they are only there to try to get their loved one help. Otherwise, they would have
Right.
left. They would have left the situation.
Right. So I think that, so I'll just say the way I think about it, which is if you're married to a drug addict or a gambling addict or a sex addict, and you have tried to help this person and done things for this person and put your life aside, and, maybe you're repeating some things from your past, because that's what we do when we're under stress. When you walk in my office, I want to say, you know what? I think you're a hero.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have given up so much of yourself for these people you love. And I admire that and I appreciate it. Maybe you didn't do it in the right way, but guess what? You weren't trained in a PhD in addiction.
Mm-hmm.
You did the best you could. Now that I'm here, we could work together. So my job, I believe, is to cheer for these people and encourage these people and validate the really difficult times that they've been through, and not blame them and not shame them and not ask what's wrong with them, that somehow they pushed the disease forward, because I think that's a bunch of hooey.
Sure.
By the way, when we get time, I want to talk about the mental health aspects of codependency, because it kind of doesn't exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, with well, I was almost ready to go there, but I know that I've read your book. I'm going to put it up here so everyone can actually see. I've actually read it twice and have underlined and highlighted and put some stickies. And I want to really, on page 22, you really outline the language of codependence versus prodependence very succinctly. And I want you to talk about how you were able to very clearly come up with this.
Well, like I said, I've worked in treatment centers a long time. And as loving and caring as we are as therapists, I would see wonderful therapists talk about the challenge of the addict and, how hard it was for them and what they were going through. But when they talked about the spouse, they would use words like nagging, complaining, devaluing, hypervigilant, acting out. And I thought, well, why do we have to use, first of all, why would a therapist say that about anybody? Mm-hmm. And second of all, why can't we turn those words into something that is more compassionate? Like nagging might be encouraging the person to do everything I can to get better. Complaining might be our lives are falling apart and I don't know how to make it better. Hypervigilance might be I've seen you drink before and fall down, and I am, of course, watching you to make sure it's going to happen again. So I really framed it in terms of caring and compassion. And yeah, I may be nagging you, but who wouldn't? You're on the floor drunk. I mean, you're kind of like, come on, it's dinner time.
Right.
So really just flipping those. In fact, I will just say this to you. To me, prodependence is flipping codependency on a 180 degree. And instead of saying what's wrong with these people and listing it, I'm going to say these people did the best they can, and let's celebrate them and translate those words into positive things, which, by the way, a lot of therapists like that as well.
So it didn't come to me until just now when you were talking about this is about love. This is about loving the addict. It is about loving yourself, and how, as therapists, the therapist can help the family members start to do their own self-care so that they can feel relief from this. And in my intervention training, I was trained as an interventionist back in 2013 by Jeff and Deborah J. with Love First. And Love First was really what we were really trained to do in this intervention period, and to bring the families together to talk about their anger, their disappointment, their sadness, their everything, and bring it back to love, and to be able to write some really loving letters for the addict to hear that. So it's turned around, and that, if it's done in a prepared way, the families actually can express all of everything underneath that they are doing, why they're doing this, but it's because of their love. And being able to do that in a letter form at the beginning and then carry that on with the prodependence language throughout the therapeutic modality throughout the family program would be really awesome.
Well, let me really, and Pam, first of all, I just want to say, I think it's very grace-based to be willing to push against the tide and say, maybe this isn't working. And let's not forget that codependency came along in the 80s, and this is a long time since that time. Yeah. But a couple of things. I want to balance. First of all, the people I'm talking about are partners who are newly, or family members who are newly dealing with someone's active addiction, or that person is still using or acting out. Mm-hmm. So if someone wants to look at their issues of relationships or problematic, they can do that in 2 years. It just isn't required. I remember at therapy school, they said one of the things you can do when someone's in a crisis is just return them where they were. They don't necessarily have to be better or stronger. And by the way, I would tell you that most partners just want life to go better. I did want to say something, though. Of course, these folks have issues. I mean, we all have issues. And we do marry people who mirror our issues, to some degree in terms of... Well, I'll tell you about twos don't marry sevens. You probably read about that. But in any case, but this is not the time. Mm-hmm. And by the way, it's not my job to force anyone to grow. If you say, now that the alcoholic's sober and I really look at my issue, great. I'm glad to help you. But you may not want to read 17 books on codependency and go to 100 meetings. And, I just think it's a prescription for not everyone can actually achieve that. I do want to address self-care. Mm-hmm. Every partner needs to focus on self-care. I mean, the way I look at partners and family members, they may not like this term, but they've been victimized. Mm-hmm. They love someone and that person has lied to them and cheated on them and manipulated them and used them. And so with the addict, very direct, very clear, you did this, these are distortions, what the F, but the partners don't need confrontation. The partners need to be told, go get and I'm speaking from a heterosexual woman perspective, although maybe not, go get your hair done. Mm-hmm. Go on a weekend with some friends. Make sure that you hang out with people who you fill yourself up, enrich yourself, because you have drained yourself out trying to help this person. And now it's your turn. Yeah. And by the way, one more thing about that, the addict needs to do their work. Right? They need to go out and deal with addiction. Partners need to do their support work, and they're different things. And so I think this is one of the reasons you can't bring couples together in the beginning and say, okay, guys, because they each have very different work to do.
It's too soon.
So I hope that answers.
Sure. And I'm going to go through to where you talk about a village, and it takes a village where we can rely on others, and that we don't, in addiction, it's hidden so much by the families. I had a daughter and her mother on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, which will be released on Tuesday. And the mother said she could not let anyone know that her daughter was in addiction. She would not speak about it. She kept herself in her home. She wouldn't talk to her friends or family, because she wanted to protect her daughter. She wanted to shame the shame that she had, all of that. And if we can all reach out to each other and have multiple people be able to rely on, we might be able to gain a better perspective of being able to take care of ourselves.
Well, one of the things that brings up for me is Al-Anon and CODA and all the support groups are partners. Mm-hmm. And I think somewhere, and just to say it, Bill Wilson's wife, and it just went right out of my head, she said that partners are addicted to the alcohol. They're addicted to the medication. They never said that you're addicted to the person. Mm-hmm. And so there was a switch, I think, at some point when codependency came around. Instead of saying, you are really focused on the problem and you need a lot of support for that problem because you've all been dealing with it, instead it turned into something like, don't be a doormat and what's wrong with you. And so I think that, and I really believe this, that the framework for those support groups changed. And they became less supportive and less nurturing and less about community and more about, the don't do this and the don't do that. By the way, I know people are going to go after me for not remembering Bill Wilson's wife. You're all going to yell at me, but I'm old.
I can't think of her name either, so that's okay.
I will. I want to say something else about community if I can.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I grew up in the 80s. I grew up in the 90s. And there was all this focus in all these, EST and all of these activities for our own personal growth. That was all about go out there and be the best person you can be. And that's what you're bringing back to your family. And that's what you bring to the world. You bring your strengths. You do, you evolve yourself. That was the theme. And I think it's kind of a boomer theme, which is like, let me tell you more about me.
Sure.
But what's changed, I think, profoundly is in mental health, we don't just look at someone's mental health by their achievement in the world. We look at them as equally healthy by the quality of their relationships. And I'll say this, my home is the pillar and foundation of my life. My husband of 24 years.
Well, congratulations. I'm almost 24 years.
You go, girl. We're gonna shop at 25. What's 25 diamonds? I don't know, whatever it is I want. I want it. But so the reason I brought this up is America, Eurocentrism in this world, the 80s and 90s, it's very much about personal development. But that's not true in any other community in the world. If you look at Hispanic culture or Native American culture or Asian culture, these folks are coming together as a community to support each other. And that's the shame part, I think, which is I have to go out and do this on my own and figure it out. Well, if I haven't, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
Well, but if I turn to that community, like you said, that's where my strength is.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because I am a grandmother of nearly 5 girls. And when I grew up, my grandparents lived basically in the house. It was a double house until my grandmother died very early. But we actually have a granddaughter that is with us a lot, and it's a joy. It's to have the different generations to be able to intermingle with each other. It doesn't happen, as you say. It happens in other cultures, but it hasn't happened in the U.S. And as you say, it is about shame. Many times people say, what's wrong? And I know that there was there was a grandmother that had her grandchildren and her daughter living with her when I was early up. And I'm like, that it just didn't seem right. But now I see the value of it is tremendous for everybody.
I don't think we were ever meant to live in little boxes, not knowing our neighbors, and we are human beings, we're social beings. And if you think about a couple of 100 years ago, it was all about grandma did this and dad did that, and everybody had a role and they came together in a community. And that was where the strength was. I wanted to say something that's in the book about, so I did a lot of studying about a Latina woman who looked at this work from her perspective. And she said, well, why don't you look at it this way? If you have a 40-year-old man or a 30-year-old man who hasn't been able to get married, and he's living with his mother. Mm-hmm. In our culture, if you went to therapy and you said, well, I'm 30 and I'm still living with mom, imagine what we would say. And yet in Hispanic, Latino, whatever you want to call it, culture, it is a norm for an unmarried man to live with his family. Mm-hmm. So our cultural perspectives only comes from what we see rather than, the way the rest of the world looks at it. Pull yourself by the bootstraps and figure it out, all that kind of stuff.
But it used to be the way it was many years ago. I mean, it was in the 50s, 60s, maybe even the early 70s, because there were families that stayed together until the young man or the woman got married. And it wasn't thought about as a horrendous thing, like, what's wrong with these people?
Well, and I don't think there were nursing homes.
No.
I don't think that people took grandma or grandpa and said, here, you go over there and be alone because the rest of the family needs to move on.
Sure.
And I don't think it's just me as a child taking care of my mom. I think it's that community. We all, mom may be ill, but she has a role. Everyone has a role. And so I think that's just came to me, but that's an example of, why don't we respect our old, even if they're troubled, it's our job to grow and be stronger by supporting them.
Right.
So although people live as long, I do want to say something about moms. Can I say something about that?
Absolutely.
So Prodependence, two things. I've written about a bunch of books, and if you know, go to conferences, you sit in the book signing line, and no one comes up to you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the book signers are sitting there saying, well, it's nice to meet you. Once in a while, someone will come up and bring you a book that you wrote 12 years ago and have you sign it. But I work Prodependence, and I have therapists coming up, and 99 of them. I have mothers, and this is really important to me. I have had women come out of this training weeping and said to me, all my life, I thought the death of my child was my fault.
Yeah.
And you're finally telling me that I didn't, what I did was the best I could do to love them. And they're incredible, 20 years since their child died, and they're weeping because codependency really put them in the box and said, what did you do to cause that? What could any mother do to cause the death of our child?
Yeah. It's interesting because in Al-Anon, there's a saying, that we didn't cause it. We didn't, we can't cure it. We can't, there are 3 C's. Create it, cause it. There's not, anyway, I'm getting them all mixed up. But at the same time, that still doesn't land with many people. And the world itself, or at least in the United States, we look at somebody who lost their child and we're looking at them due to drugs or alcohol. What is wrong with you?
Right? If I lost my child to cancer, there would be no sense. I would never walk in the world ever, nor would anyone ever say to me, what part did you play in this?
Right.
And codependency absolutely gives people that impression that and these are people who would jump out in front of a truck if their child were running across the street. And I really want to emphasize, people are doing, I tell my husband this all the time, we're all doing the best we can.
Mm-hmm.
It may be imperfect. As I said, you may have never finished high school. How are you supposed to know, what a PhD would do with an addict? But here's the thing, I can help them. If they come to me and I say, let's help support you. Let's help you grow. You don't know how to do it, great. I'm here for you. Mm-hmm. Rather than saying, why are you nagging? Why are you complaining? I want to celebrate these people who've done so much. Even they gave up their lives for these people.
And they finally,
that's the power of love.
And a lot of times when you finally see them when someone goes to treatment. So
yes.
How about celebrating
celebrate
the fact that they're now in treatment and they could have a way to be able to let go of this. Brene Brown says a lot about the shame and vulnerability, and we are so not in tune to be vulnerable, and we are so afraid of feeling that shame, but so quick to judge others.
Well, it's easier to point at other people than it is ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
I work with women whose husbands, because I work in sex addiction, right? And I work with men too, and all kinds of folks, but I tend to get men. And these women, well, first of all, how could you ever be responsible for your spouse having sex with 100 people? I mean, it's just not something you could ever be responsible. And actually, that's part of where this came from. Is when we're looking at me saying, how could I be responsible in any way for what happened?
Right.
But I wanted you to say that again, because there was something else I wanted to say to you, and I'm completely lost. At my age, I don't remember anything. But you said something I thought was really valuable.
Do you think I remember it?
Lois Wilson.
Yes.
Lois Wilson. Yes. I've redeemed myself. Why don't we? Yeah, I have no idea what I was going to say. It'll come back to me.
And I am trying to think the last
We're edited, right?
Yes. trying to think the last thing I had said there. Janine, do you remember?
Nope.
Oh God.
It'll come back.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I got it. When you see the loved one and it's after they've gone to treatment, but you're...
Yes. Thank you.
Is that where it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Girl, you're good.
I try.
So as they're in treatment, finally they were able to get them into treatment, or they agreed to it. You went to the extent of getting them into treatment. What about that? celebrate.
Well, the partners. So you have to understand that this person who is involved with an addict, who has actively been acting out and making life a mess, when they come to treatment, we are seeing them at the worst moment of their life.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a major crisis. Therapists don't think about, what were they like 10 years ago? Or like 15 years ago. So you're seeing people at the worst moment of their life, and you're judging or making conclusions about what's wrong with them, when what's wrong with them is the situation that they're in. So, and by the way, we're taught never diagnose somebody who's in a crisis. That's what therapists are taught.
I love that part in your book where when they're in a crisis and everyone is quick to diagnose. And when I hear that the mother or the wife or whatever has a personality disorder, or is diagnosed in some sort of a way that, and I'm talking about the mother because for some reason I think the mothers are the ones that really push to get somebody into treatment. We as interventionists get the calls more quickly from the mothers, and then they get the fathers on, and they have to give the blessing, but the fathers are not as quick they would rather stay in denial longer, or they don't think it's quite that bad, or they just are so ashamed they can't go there. There are a lot of different reasons, I'm sure.
Well, I'm going to say something that's somewhat sexist, and I'm willing to go out there, is that in a heterosexual relationship, we have roles. And actually in all relationships, and one of the roles that women often take on is the person who's protecting the nest. They're making sure everybody has what they need. They're protecting their home. I'm not saying they're not at work making $1 million or whatever it is, but that's kind of their emotional job. Men, not so much.
Yeah.
When we're out in the world, we're fighting the fight. And by the way, that thing about codependency doesn't apply to men. We never said men are giving too much, men are too caring, it only got applied, and I think in a way that devalues the strengths of women. Women's strengths are empathy, compassion, community building. That got devalued in the past. Again, that time when it was all about achievement, that's a very male quality. And again, believe me, I'll know earlier about it. But I'm pretty biological in training, and we have roles, to some degree. Doesn't matter gender, but someone's going to take that compassion nurturing role and watch the house. Someone's going to take the role of sort of the bigger picture of maintaining. And so why do we support the person who's, sorry. So to answer your question, I understand why this ends up on a woman, because she is looking around saying, is everybody safe? Is everybody okay? That's part of her nature.
Creating the nest to keep everybody safe.
And holding on to it.
Yeah.
And men are supposed to be out there, this is not going to go well, protecting it.
Yeah.
And I say to men in treatment who've been acting out all over the place, I say, what is your number one job with your family? It's probably not have sex with a lot of people. It's probably, I guess my number one job is to keep my family safe. We haven't done that.
Yeah. And men are unfortunately put in position where if they don't feel like they're enough to keep them safe, then that's where the trouble starts really.
Tell me more.
In regard to if men are not able to make enough money for the household, and they feel less than, and they're not able to express that to their wives and or husbands, if that's the roles.
Right.
They're feeling less than and not feeling, and they were brought up in my generation. You don't talk about it. The men are supposed to protect and to be able to have no emotions. They're supposed to bring in the money, and they're supposed to provide for the family. And if that
happy wife, happy life.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So there's so much here. And again, I want to bring you back to talk about the male sexual addiction and the seeking integrity that you have in Los Angeles. And I may bring in my business partner in this conversation as well. As a male, I think that may be a good one to bring. And he would love to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think talking about sex addiction is its own thing. People don't understand it. And then you got the porn problem, and people say it's a men's thing. It really takes some work to have insight into it.
Yeah, and
So yeah, I'll come back.
I mean, sex addiction doesn't mean it's all men. There's definitely sex.
Oh, I opened the
addiction for
first program in the country for women.
Yeah.
I'm going to say another reasonably sexist thing. I'm going to get in so much trouble. Men tend to act out sexually. They often do. I'm going to pass on that. I know what I'm going to say. Let me say this. Having run and created women's treatment programs, and this is missed so often, the reason that woman might have ended up relapsing or getting into real trouble with addiction is because of the failure of relationships, whether or not it's on her, and that inability or breaking up. That is really someone that. So when I'm working with a woman, she doesn't come for sex addiction. She comes from for eating disorders, for drug and alcohol. When you look at her history, you see how devastated she's been and why she returns to that acting out.
Yeah.
Men are a little more selfish.
And talking about sex addiction versus love addiction, and how does that blend? That's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, we have lots to talk about. I'm really excited.
All right. Thank you very much for coming on, and I appreciate you.
Hey, Pam, would you mind if I just said, if people want to reach you, how would they do that? I would appreciate that.
Actually,
or at least learn about Prodependence.
The trailer actually has that, but I would like you go ahead and say what you can, because it'll be.
It's fine.
No?
I don't want to.
No.
I'm glad to. I think people need.
Please.
They may be listening in the car.
Yes. Go ahead.
So people want to reach out and they want to get more information and they want to get support. And we have a site called seekingintegrity.com, 14 free groups for partners and family members. We really try to give a lot away. And by the way, you can write me at rob@seekingintegrity.com. I tell people to ask. I put nobody ever writes, nobody ever calls. I don't know what it is. And Prodependence has its own site, which is prodependence.org. And there are people starting meetings and all of that because they want to have a grace-based way to be validated for the people they love.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for joining the conversation today. If you are seeking help for yourself or a loved one, please reach out to our Feinberg Consulting team at 248-538-5425. That's 248-538-5425, and check out our website at feinbergcare.com. I'm grateful for our guests and all who have joined us today. Make sure you follow us on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen to podcasts.